My very great pleasure is to welcome Rufus Pollock, who I believe some of you may have met whilst we were having our tea and coffee. He's a well-known advocate of open science and open knowledge. And he's going to talk about how we can work together to bring about change. So, over to you.
Thank you very much. Great, welcome everybody, and really wonderful to meet you today. So I'm going to talk about the open revolution and platformomics today a little bit. And the subtitle is New Rules for a New World. And my intention is that by the end of the talk, you'll know what I mean by that. And I'll mention that I'm here today. I have my book, The Open Revolution, has just come out, and a lot of what I'm talking about kind of comes from this, about how we can rewrite the rules of the information age. And I want to start by asking you, what's new? And what I mean by what's new about the digital world? So just think for a moment, what's different and new now compared to when we didn't have the digital revolution happening? Does anyone have any want to shout out what they kind of would say? What's different now before we had digital technology and we're in this information age? What's changed? What's new and different? We have internet intermediaries. Great. Anyone else to shout it out? Speed of communication. Communication is so much faster. Yes. Anyone else? Communication everywhere. Yeah? With everyone. And with everyone, whether you want it or not. Right. Anything else?
Unfiltered information leading to some misinformation.
So unfiltered information leading to misinformation, kind of an information overload even. Yeah? Anything else? Sorry? Time and place no longer matter. The disappearance of distance. Yes. Anything else? Loads of distractions. Loads of distractions. Yeah, exactly. We're in a distraction economy. Yes. Anything else? Paying lots of times for content. Okay, someone else that echoed there. Okay, so, if we were thinking about it, I mean, the one question I'd have is imagine, we're back, I don't know, in the 19th century and, the telegraph arrives. And there might have been some people like, oh my God, there's so much communication now, and now there's misinformation. Probably is different from the internet. But, some of these changes have been going on for a while. So what's really new about the digital world? I mean, all of those things that everyone said were completely correct. They're all facets of it. But I would suggest there's one profound difference. Particularly, I'm an economist originally by training. So I kind of would like to think about what's different about the digital economy. Or I would like to put it more precisely, the information economy. Because what digital technology really does is move us into a world where what we make and produce and consume is more and more information. In one form or another. It might be Netflix, it might be kind of really obviously digital bits, but even if you think about things, like my mother's a farmer, and my mother, I have to say, is not a particular fan of digital technology. She resists, I always remember when she first got a mobile phone, she was like, she'd never have it on. I said, well, why have a mobile phone if you never have it? She says, well, it wears the battery out. So the thing is, even my mother, who's a farmer and who's really not particularly interested in the digital world, even agriculture is now more and more, if you think of what makes up agriculture, the design of the tractor. More and more of that value is actually in the information. Even in seeds, genetically modified seeds, it's information. So more and more of our world is information. Now, what I want you to do is just a small thing at the beginning is think, which is the odd one out on this board? Who thinks it's this? By the way, this is a medicine on the right-hand side, if it's not clear. So who thinks it's the medicine that's the odd one out? One of the three is the odd one out. Is it the medicine? No one thinks that. Who thinks it's the movie? One person? Great. Who thinks it's the banana? A few people. And who doesn't want to offer an opinion in case they're wrong? Right. Great. 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 Okay. So, well, the one that's odd out here is the banana. Because the other two things on this screen, they're basically made of information. Even in medicine, really, the vast majority of the value or the cost of a medicine is in the information, the formula of it. You know, on average, for a medicine that you buy that's at least in patent, maybe under 5% of the cost is actually manufacturing, putting the chemicals together and shipping it to you. 95% of the cost, or 90% of the cost, will be for the formula, for the invention, for the patent, paying the patent holder. And similarly for a movie, how much does it cost to make a copy of the movie for you over the internet, to send those bits over the wire? How much does it cost each time Netflix sends you a copy of?
Nothing.
Practically nothing. Exactly. Almost nothing. But it's because it's all made of information. But the banana is a physical thing. Unless it's a genetically modified banana, it's basically just it grows on the tree, etc. Now, in what way is this new and different? What's different about that? Well, how much does it cost to make each of these? Well, each banana costs about €1. It maybe makes 10 million, maybe it's 100 million. You know, you could debate to make the movie depending on its cost. And maybe it's 100 million or even 1 billion to come up with the medicine in the first place. How much, once you've come up with it, does it cost to make the next banana or the next movie or the next medicine? Someone just said, so how much for the banana? Someone just said. Who was it just there? The same. Perfect. It costs the same amount to make the banana, but to make the movie, as someone just said, is $0.01, and to make the medicine is maybe €1. I mean, it might be 10 euros. Now, what is the ratio? The ratio for banana, once you've got one banana, making another banana is exactly the same cost. But making the next copy of the movie or the medicine, it's around 1 billion or 100 million to 1. Or the other way around, if you like, it's 100th millionth of the original cost to make the new copy. Now that is the difference between the old world that we've lived in for thousands of years, and the old economy, was we lived in an economy of physical things, of atoms, of bread, of steel. And even though we had revolutions before, we had the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago when we stopped being gatherer-hunters, or we had the industrial revolution 300 years ago when we started making steel instead of just making bread. There's something profoundly different. It isn't just faster. I mean, it's really something profoundly different, which is that you have a world of costless copying. And that changed everything. That is the single greatest change in the nature of technology, if you like, of production, or just the nature of production of our economy in human history. Because if you think about it, almost everything came from our physical world of how we run the world, and that is a world of scarcity. There's not enough bananas. It's hard to make more bananas. And this is a world of abundance. Once I have the movie, I can give a copy to everyone on the planet. Now, I want to explain the implications of that because they're profound. Because that's kind of obvious to you, maybe. I mean, you can't, once you get it, you're like, well, yeah, I knew that. But that is the single biggest difference. And no one in the room said costless copying. What's new and different? Costless copying. So just to go to this. So in March 2018, as you know, this year, a couple of months ago, the scandal broke around the political consulting firm Cambridge Analytica and the Facebook. And The Guardian in London quoted a former director of the consultancy. And she said, corporations like Google, Facebook, and Amazon All these large companies, they're making tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, or billions of dollars from monetizing people's data. And I've been telling companies and governments for years that data is probably your most precious asset. Individuals should be able to monetize their own data or control it. That's their own human value. It's not to be exploited. And other commentators were all but unanimous in saying that our problem with these internet giants is their control of our personal data. But this diagnosis is fundamentally wrong, mistaken. And just as in medicine, if you misdiagnose the illness, what happens? You recommend the wrong treatment. And the patient doesn't get better, maybe they die. Now, it's not your data, you see, that Google and Facebook are exploiting, it's your attention. It's your eyes glued to the screen that are making them all the money. It's because when we want to search for something, when we want to connect to friends, we have to go on those platforms. And billions of us turn to those sites. And it is this overwhelming dominance that's so powerful. Now, of course, I'm not saying these companies don't use personal data to target ads. That's part of their business model. But imagine even that they had no access to data specifically about you. They'd still make huge amounts of money, just as television networks made in the old days. Television networks didn't have personal data on you, but they were incredibly profitable. I don't know who here has heard of Warren Buffett, but Warren Buffett used to say, in the old days at least, that you could have your incompetent nephew run a television network in the United States, and it would still make 20 to 25% return on capital. Because they had a monopoly of your attention, and then advertisers would pay for that. And it's true on newspapers before the internet happened. Newspapers used to be very lucrative in the same way. And newspapers look just like Google in many ways as a business model. It is their monopoly of your attention that matters. And to diagnose the true problem, which these businesses represent, we must ask how they become such incredible monopolies. And by the way, I hope the reason I'm talking about Facebook, not just because it's interesting to you, but I hope you'll think of the analogies with areas that you directly deal with, and we'll come to in a moment. Because we must ask ourselves how they became such incredible monopolies. And the answer is they operate where three different phenomena converge. One is platform effects, the other is costless copying, and the third is intellectual property rights. Now, first of all, what do I mean by those things? So platform effects. Twitter, eBay, and others like Google or Facebook operate as platforms, places where different participants connect, right? Now, this is actually a really old phenomenon. I've drawn it here, particularly like my really great clip art here, but trying to say, if you go back thousands of years, there would have still been platforms or marketplaces. They'd actually been called a marketplace. They'd have been the place where you went to buy the fish. They're a place where buyers and sellers come together. Now, the thing is, and that's, sorry, just to mention, like Amazon's doing that today. It's just a modern version. Facebook's also a platform. It's a little bit different in that it doesn't directly connect you with sellers. It connects you with each other. And then it connects you, maybe you want it or not, with advertisers because they want to get access to your attention. Now, Google is another one who connects buyers, if you like, with content providers and acts as the intermediary by which you find content. Right? In fact, once you understand platforms, you understand most of the information economy. Now, what's the thing in the world that you might deal with? Well, classically, journals are a platform. They're a place where readers meet authors. Now, the thing about them is that platform businesses, whether it was an ancient marketplace in Athens or it's Google today, have a very simple mechanism, which is they tend to one, or a very few. Now, why is that? Because the more customers there are, the more sellers there are, and the more sellers there are, the more customers there are. You don't want to go to a fish market where there's only one fish seller. You want to go to a fish market with lots of fish sellers. Similarly, fish sellers want to go to a place where there's lots of buyers. Similarly with readers and authors, similarly with Facebook. You don't want to go to a social network where there's no one. So there's this incredible feedback effect between the two sides. More buyers mean more sellers, which mean more buyers, etc. It's like a snowball, and eventually one snowball gets all the snow. So there's this cynical tendency of platforms, right? And so this mutually reinforcing effect means that rivals are excluded, either deliberately or by the company sometimes, or simply by the logic of the platform working itself out. And then new entrants cannot compete on equal terms. And so small initial advantages become entrenched monopolies. Once upon a time, there were lots of journals people could publish in. But then one day, there's a few very prestigious journals that you really want to publish in as an author, and that you really have to subscribe to if you're a library. You no longer have much of a choice. Now, that was one thing. The owners of fish markets and stock exchanges were exactly the same, make good livings. But there's something different for these vast online platforms, or even for Elsevier. They're in a different league because of infinite costless copying. When you start to glimpse the extraordinary implications of this fact, you begin to understand the modern world. Because the thing that we've already said is once you have one copy of a piece of information, you can make 1 million like that. So expansion is free. I can make as many copies as I wish, effectively no cost, at the touch of a button, and this is unprecedented. There are no marginal costs, since there is no need to continually to buy raw materials or new shops from which to sell things. That means that Microsoft, Facebook, Google, and others have been able to scale up their services at an unprecedented rate and to make unprecedented profits. Just think of what the profit margins of some of these companies are. They're kind of gross profit margins. Like at Microsoft, what's the cost of each new copy of Windows? Practically zero. I mean, your gross margins are close to 99%. What's the cost of an additional user to Google? Almost nothing. What does it cost to have that new algorithm? Nothing. To have a copy of the algorithm running for a new user, if you like? Nothing. Now, costless copying would not be so profitable if it were truly unlimited. If anyone receiving a copy of Microsoft Windows or a copy of the latest journal article could make as many copies as they wanted and send them to everyone else, then, or if all the algorithms that run Google and Facebook were available for any other company to use and modify, then they wouldn't be so profitable. The final element that makes these businesses such powerful monopolies is their exclusive right to make the copies. Thanks to intellectual property in the form of patents and copyrights, they have exclusive control of their digital information at the heart of their businesses. The software and algorithms that power their products and platforms. Now, I want you to think about that, which is to say, it is our framework of intellectual property. The other two things I've discussed are just laws of the world. Costless copying and platform effects are just nature. There's nothing you can do about them. They're in fact wonderful things in some ways. Costless copying means we're in a world of abundance. Platform effects is just life. But I want you to think that we could have had an alternative world. And you can see that because we have one incredible experiment of one of the greatest platforms of all time that wasn't closed. It wasn't proprietarily owned and controlled. What platform was that, do you think? You use it every day. It's the internet. The internet is in fact more complicated probably as a set of protocols and systems than Facebook. Yet, partly by chance, because for some reason the United States government in the early 1960s funded a bunch of people to kind of invent the internet and release the protocols openly, it was completely open. Anyone could take the protocols that make the internet and run an internet service provider, connect to other parts of the internet, you can build a website. So what's the result? You have loads of web hosting providers. You're not limited to one. And you could have had that for Facebook. You could have had a world where the algorithms and the software and stuff that run that system were completely open. It would have been called, I don't know, Open Social or the social net. Somehow the US government in the early 1980s decided to fund these advanced social networking protocols that wouldn't be useful to most of the world till about 2005. But there they were, ready and waiting, in use in academia. So we know that open platforms are possible. There is one internet note, by the way. You still get one. There was once, competition to be the dominant internet, but there ended up being one. Platforms will go to one mostly, but it could be open. And that is what we want. So I'm just saying, so it's intellectual property right, and the result has been monopolies. And the result of running this information, I just want to say, it's this framework then of intellectual property that gives a single company the exclusive rights. But this monopoly, remember, does not exist in a state of nature. It's not like normal property rights, right? I mean, even look at kids. Have you ever seen kids playing? They have a sense of mine. Like, there's just a fact of the world that, these are my shoes. We can't both wear my shoes at the same time. And if you take my shoes away, I don't have them. There's just a fundamental physical fact of the world that real physical things are rival in use. They don't produce costless copies. So there's a real logic to that. But this monopoly of intellectual property rights does not exist in a state of nature. It's the result of the copyright patents which we as a society created about 300 or 400 years ago. Now, even if subsequent copies are cheap, of course, the initial creation of information is expensive. I know it. My book took me 3.5 years, right? Even though you can get a digital copy for free. And intellectual property is one way to pay for this first copy. But it is not the only way to fund innovation. And there are ways that we could replace patents and copyright with remuneration rights, which would preserve the incentives to innovate without creating monopolies, which would allow us to have openness, have abundance, and pay innovators and creators. Now, I also want to mention there is some profound implications of running the information economy on the old rules of intellectual property rights. Why do I call them old rules? Because we took property rights, the old rules we created for the physical world, I own my car, I own my shoes, that are brilliant. They work well. They work better than most other systems that have been tried. And we misapplied them in this new world. And the result of that is, for example, incredible growing inequality. In 2016, the 8 richest people in the world had as much money as the bottom 50% of humanity. And of those 8 men, and they're all men, 6 of them were tech billionaires. 7 of them who'd become billionaires only in the last 10 years. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin. This is an injustice, and it's also a political time bomb. It's one of the things driving some of the political populism we see today is the growing inequality resulting from running the information economy on these old rules. And the true cause of this unsustainable concentration of wealth and power is the exclusive ownership of digital information. Facebook, which is one company which is controlled by one person. Mark Zuckerberg has voting control of Facebook, has access to 2 billion people. That's incredible. And we also should wake up to the cost in stunted growth and opportunities. By nature, monopolists fear competition that threatens their position. They're driven to neutralize potential rivals by destroying them or by devouring them. I don't know here who's familiar with the story of the father of Zeus, Kronos, who was a titan. And he was foretold by a prophecy that his children would overthrow him. So what did he do as a sensible titan? He ate his children. Every time his wife had a child, he ate them. And then one day, his wife managed to kind of hide away and give birth to Zeus, who was not eaten. And one day, while his father was sleeping, he crept up, cut open his father's stomach. It's pretty bloody, those myths, right? And he let his brothers and sisters out, and they made war on the Titans. And of course, the ending of the story is they did overthrow the Titans. But that is the fear of every monopolist. Zuckerberg, Brin, anyone who's with a monopolist is constantly living in fear of being overthrown. Why, other than to do that, would Facebook pay $22 billion for WhatsApp in 2014 when its revenues were $10 million? $10 million in revenue, it paid $22 billion because it was afraid it would become a threat. Now, whether it destroys them or it buys them, it neutralizes them. We never got to see what WhatsApp would have been if it actually competed with Facebook. Think of how fecund and generative the internet was. All of these companies today, even that are monopolies, only exist because the internet let them exist. Imagine the internet had been run by a single telecom company, as it was in the past. Would they have allowed these companies to exist and threaten them? No. They'd have allowed some version of them that was neutralized, that wasn't too innovative. So we will never know. That's the problem we also know. We know what price Facebook paid, but we'll never know the cost in lost competition and stunted growth. It is the consumer, future innovators, and societies that lose out. And I'll just ask you to think something for a moment. Just to think about this. So I remember when I came on the internet I got on the internet in 1998. I was like, wow, this is incredible. You know, imagine what it would be like if all human kind of knowledge, everything we've written, every book, was out there on the web, interconnected. And I was like, this is surely just a matter of time. And then think of the innovation that could happen. Think of the way that we could match things together. Think of what we could do for search and discovery in this sea of knowledge if all that content was available to all the innovators to play with. Think of the lost opportunities in innovation. The crucial thing today is actually search and matching for academics and other researchers to find what they're looking for. But to do that, you need access to the content. I mean, think of the opportunities of what we could have invented if we'd really had open access to the content of research, open to any innovator to play around with and create with. I mean, think also about Facebook. Look what the internet looked like after 10 years. I mean, has Facebook changed in the last 10 years much? You know, the level of innovation is quite paltry. So once we've understood this, that it is clear and that it is counterproductive to extend the old laws with which we govern the physical economy to this virtual world, that it makes no sense. That what were property rights in the old world of land and steel have become monopolies when mistranslated into this new world of bits. That monopolies that are unjustified and unjust, and that are dangerous both to our economies and our societies. That we need new rules for this new world. Rules that are appropriate to the information economy and that provide ways to reward innovators and creators while preserving fairness and freedom, and that give everyone a stake in our digital future. So most simply, we want an open world, a world in which all digital information is open and is free for everyone to use, build on, and share, and where innovators are recognized and rewarded. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because that might be the question in your head. It's great, Rufus. It's wonderful, this wonderful open world, but how are creators going to get paid? How are you going to pay to write your book? Because it costs 3.5 years and a lot of my time to make that book. So, first of all, I've explained to you, though, what open platforms are. I just want to be clear about that. Open platforms are, first of all, open information. Information is free to use, build on, and share. And information, I mean content, software, algorithms, data. And an open platform, be it Google or it was Nature, would be a place where all the content, all the software, all the data that's not personal data is open. It would mean that I could build, if I wanted, my own version of it. Now, I want you to think for a moment then about journals. So we've got readers, we've got journals, we've got authors. Now, at the moment, one of the things we have is that content gets locked to the platform, right? Everyone's familiar with this. I can't put up my thing anywhere. But if these were really open platforms like the internet, right, you could post your content anywhere. And there are some examples of this in a way. Archive, does everyone here know archive with an x.org, right? In a way, it was a version of this. I mean, this is the weird thing. When I did maths at Cambridge, archive was just around. I was like, surely this is what's going to happen to all journals pretty soon. And the thing is, it has, but it's only happened illegally. It's like Sci-Hub. There are places I can go and have this experience of unfettered access. The irony is we're still so limited. Even though Sci-Hub does give you that access, it doesn't allow all the things you could do if it was actually legitimate access. For example, imagine like every paper, the footnotes linked directly. You know, just stuff that really annoys me when I'm doing research. Why don't the footnotes just directly link to the other article, like so I can read it immediately or read the book? I mean, imagine what that we could have created for scholarship. The innovation that could have happened. Now, imagine I've got an open platform. So what would an open platform like a journal look like? Well, I mean, whether you'd have journals at all, but it would be a place where stuff got stored, and it would probably have lists. I mean, what is a journal in essence? Originally, it was distribution. That's not so relevant in the digital world. I mean, it used to be it would print copies and mail them to you. The other part of a journal is it's kind of a selection. It's a filter. It's like, you should read this, and it's editorial. It's some work making the articles better. As I now know, having written my book, editorial matters. Okay, so there's cost. So journals provide, what they provide editorial and they provide filtering. I know I should read articles in Nature or in the American Economic Review because they're kind of good quality articles. Someone's reviewed them, edited them, etc. Now, so the two types of info that journals actually kind of have. One is the articles, and the other is the reviewing and filtering. Now, as we kind of know, the articles, largely the journals do not pay for the articles to be created. Right? Public funding pays for that. So we've got the second item. Because I just want to emphasize that all the stuff that's kind of gone wrong, the fact we've got a closed economy for doing journal and information distribution in academia, is because they've decided they need to pay for this, and to do that, they have locked us, they've locked this content, which could be open, right? They've locked it to the platform with copyright. They've used intellectual property rights. You give us your copyright. You're not allowed, now obviously we have gold OA and green OA and things like that, but we don't really have this seamless experience where I could just go online and find any article I want openly. And like, you know, let's say Rufus says, I want to start my own, not a journal, we could call it, but where I review the top articles in my field and put them together for you to read, for people to subscribe to and read, which is kind of the filtering that goes on. You know, I can't really do that. I have to link through to some copyright, you know, some platform, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Now, so what do we need to pay for? We need to pay for reviewing and filtering. In theory. We need to pay for people who do this job at the moment, in theory. Now, I want to just take a moment and talk about what I then mean by remuneration rights. And I want to talk about Spotify as a way to pay for this. So I actually want you to, before I think about Spotify, I want you to think about the old world for a moment. So who remembers iTunes? For buying music. I'm only joking because, so if you remember iTunes, what's the deal with iTunes in the old days? You pay how much per track? 80p, $1, €1, whatever, right? But you pay per track. So it's the classic copyright world. There is abundance. Everyone could have access. It would cost not. But no, we pay per item, so there's this kind of rationing. And you kind of know it's a kind of weird world, that world. You know it's weird for one reason, which is that Apple are busy selling iPods with 20,000 track capacity. Now, how many teenagers do you know who have $20,000 to spend on music? None, right? So there's something going on there that they know there's this problem, which is people are going to want more music than they can buy under that model. So what happens in the Spotify world, okay? Because we do need to pay creators, right? We need to pay them. But what we can do in this model is we can kind of move to an all-you-can-eat buffet model. You pay once and you have unlimited access. Now, we're familiar with this. In some ways, it's obviously what you do in the US. You pay once. You don't have individual academics buy it. In theory, you subscribe. But Spotify are this incredible change when you think about it. You don't pay per track. You pay once, £10 a month, and then you have unlimited access. Now, and what's also interesting is that it's not the government deciding how the money gets divided up. That's the other interesting thing. The money gets given out to artists from the big pool of money that Spotify have based on demand. Now, because, you know, I'm a sort of free market guy. I like free enterprise. You know, I do, you know, I think the state's great too, but I would like to have private enterprise still, you know, out there doing stuff. So what's kind of really interesting here is you have like, what's odd is Spotify looks a bit like a government, right? Everyone pays their taxes, they put it in a bit pot of money, and then they pay out. But they pay it out based on usage. And in this world, if you thought about it, what would it be like if you scaled Spotify and you turned, the government didn't run Spotify, the actual streaming part, but they did the licensing part. Imagine that everyone in the UK paid a fee each month to the government through, let's say, their internet bill or whatever. And that money got put in a big pot. For those who know collecting societies, you might think this sounds familiar. They put the money in a big pot. The good thing is bad thing about collecting, but they put it in a big pot, and the money is then distributed based on usage of the tracks. Like, if my song gets listened to 1,000 times and your one gets listened to 9,000 times, then you get 9/10 of the money and I get 1/10 of the money. Yeah? Now, what's beautiful about that model is everyone pays, artists still get paid, but we have open access to all music in the UK. Unlimited open music. And not just for consumers, suddenly innovate. Anyone who wants to do like a music, like like it'll be sexy now, like AI for music matching, they don't have to do some licensing deal to get access to music. They can get the raw music. We can have startups all over the place doing cool stuff, et cetera, right? Now, I want to ask you a question. If you do the maths, how much would we have to put in this fund, each person in the UK, to pay artists and creators all over the world who get money from UK kind of consumers today? If we were to do open Spotify, pretty accurate. It's about 65p per month. So you'd pay 6.5% of what you pay for Spotify. You'd pay artists and creators as much money as they are getting today, and you'd have unlimited open music. Now, just to get your juices flowing, you think, okay, music's great, Rufus. What about medicines? Is there anyone here who knows someone who's had cancer? Right? Okay, I've got a really close relative of mine who doesn't have cancer but has a serious lung illness. They need medicines. Medicine that slows down the degenerative disease they have costs £70,000 a year on the NHS, if the NHS pay for it. The NHS, in fact, don't pay for it because it's too expensive, they've decided. So my relative is not getting the drug, and the company's getting no money. That's monopoly rights for you, right? How much does it cost to make my relative's drug? £700. Now, I'm not saying we don't want to pay £70,000 in life, by the way. We need to pay for the innovation. But the model we have at the moment, it's like the iTunes, you pay per track. Imagine that for medicines, we all paid our money, we spit off a little bit of money for manufacturing of the money we put in the NHS, but let's say we take 95% of the money we spend on medicines and we put it in a fund that pays innovators. And then the deal is that medicines are open. Anyone can manufacture them, just like when medicines go out of patent. In that model, innovators here who are coming up with new medicines, biotech startups, get as much money as today, so they're paid just as well, and my relative gets the drug because it can now be manufactured for £700. Now, there's something kind of magical about this, because if you're wondering, it sounds like something for nothing. You should be asking. In the physical world, this wouldn't work. If I said, let's get all our money together for cars in the UK, put it in a big fund, and then buy cars for everyone, it wouldn't work. Now, why wouldn't it work? Because you can't make new cars for free once you've got one car. That's what makes this magical. That's what makes the all-you-can-eat buffet model work, right? So you can pay as much money for medicines, and give everyone practically access. And you could do that for all kinds of areas, this model. Now, I'm also pointing out that this model is so much better that even though Spotify actually managed to do it. It took them a while, by the way. Back in 1999, everyone said, let's do this. I mean, even Napster were trying to do that deal. It took 10 years. Now, there are limits to Spotify, by the way. When it's not the government or some actual regulated setup, there are bad things about Spotify. Like Spotify will never charge a fee that means everyone gets access. Why? They're not having a monopoly per track, but they're another level up of monopoly, right? Spotify, just if you do the maths for yourself, just think about it. Imagine that 20% in the UK, you could supply everyone for £1 a month. Everyone in the UK. But 20% of people in the UK will pay £10 a month. It's a better deal to charge £10 a month than have 80% of people not have access. It's the same kind of problem. But it's why you need someone like the government running the remuneration rights fund, at least collecting the money. The fund should be independently run. It should have an automated distribution mechanism so that artists don't think they're going to have to depend on some bureaucrat deciding what's happening. But you need them organizing the payment into the pool of money. So Spotify are great at showing you that the model is so great that even private companies will try to do it, but there are limits. It's why we need the remuneration rights fund run by government. Now, let's think for journals. So forget the articles, right? Because we all agreed that the articles are already kind of paid for. I mean, if you want to ask me about the article, come to it. But what are you actually paying for in theory when we subscribe to Nature? I mean, I know some people here might be to say nothing. It's just like we're just paying for the monopoly, right? At this point. But, you know, if you wanted, and even in that case, how do you get out? Well, you have got to pay something for filters and aggregators. There are people who are going to do that job. Maybe it's someone in the future. The journals of the future are not hand-curated by editors and reviewers. They're an algorithm. But even coming up with new algorithms and software to do this work costs money, right? Coming up with innovations in how you do that platform or whatever, doing the work to have unique identifiers, whatever. There's work that goes on in building those databases and those systems. If you want it to be done by private enterprise of some kind in that, how do you do it? Like, I know a startup at the moment that's trying to do basically search, better search for journals. And you know what? They currently seem to spend 80% of their time trying to negotiate deals to have access to journals, not writing software. So in this model, what you could do is you could say libraries, which would probably be the funders here or others, would say, we're going to create a remuneration rights fund. We'll put some of our money, and it's going to go to people who do filters and aggregators that are open in the sense of not our proprietarily taking possession of the papers, and who make their software even open. But we will give out money, and this would be the exciting part. We can give out money based on what's used, just like today. So like, let's say Rufus, even if you just think of it the stupid example of filtering, I start my own journal, where I do the work, and it takes time, reading all the papers that come out in my area of economics, deciding which are the good ones, reviewing them, etc. I have Rufus's list, or whatever it's called, right? Rufus's journal. And I will get paid from this remuneration rights fund based on how many people read my journal. So you can have demand-based signaling, which is what you want. You don't need the government or whoever runs this fund deciding who gets the money. You don't need to decide up front, oh, we're going to have a fund for innovation in like e-publishing and like decide who we give out these grants to. You can have it in a demand-based way. Venture capitalists can back new journals or even new algorithms for finding content. And you could have it this way. And the beautiful part also about remuneration rights fund, I've thought about a lot, is that you've got to have something that's feasible and incremental. The great part about remuneration rights, which I'm suggesting, is that we could replace, ultimately, all of our entire intellectual property rights regime today with remuneration rights. We'd swap over, is you can do it incrementally and by area. You can do remuneration rights for music without doing it for medicines. Keep your patents and copyright. You can do it for journals. You could do it for music or medicine one at a time. You could do it by country. Keep your patents and copyrights elsewhere, but in the UK, we'll have a deal where you license into the system. You license your copyrights into it. So you can implement it feasibly. And even for you guys, for libraries, you could start this as a pilot. You're going to say, hey, we're going to put £10 million or £5 million a year in a fund for people who do filters and aggregators where the content is open, rather than just funding, paying author fees for subscriber journals, right? You could experiment in that way. So, I want to kind of wrap up at this moment and say there is this fundamental choice for the information age, and you can tell I'm not a graphic designer again, right? And I really want to suggest this. This is like the most exciting moment. Like, giving these talks is a real honor and privilege, in the sense that this is the biggest policy choice of the 21st century, I would suggest to you. And most people don't realize it yet. When people wrote about the Trump election, I didn't see one article that said one of the single biggest causes of Trump being elected is the digital economy running on old rules. No one wrote an article like that. But I would argue to you that the single biggest driver of the growing inequality in the United States, which was behind those people in crucial swing states voting for someone like Trump because he was giving them answers, whether they're right or not, he was saying, I get it that there's a problem for you if you're blue collar or you're white collar, and you're like seeing your job getting offshored. No one's saying that. And this is a profound policy choice. It will shape inequality. It will shape even growth and innovation. It will shape research in the years to come. And we have a choice. It's a really clear choice. And I think the only other biggest item we have right now on the agenda is really climate change. The thing is, climate change is a tough one. It's a collective action problem where you have to sacrifice something maybe today for stuff in the future. The incredible thing about open is it is win-win. You know, even if you want to go to Elsevier and just say, Elsevier, we will give you as much money. We will put as much money in the pot as we spend today buying journals and paying for this stuff. We'll put it in the remuneration rights pot. The deal is that we then go open, just like you could do it with pharma. Trying to go to pharma and say, we should reduce your patents. But no, you could go to pharma and say, we're going to put as much money in our remuneration rights fund as we do today. As much money as we spend buying patented medicines is in this fund. You're going to be as well off in the future as you are now. But what we want is open information so that anyone can manufacture it. Anyone can have a copy of the journal article. That choice is the biggest choice we have. And it's implementable with remuneration rights. So that's what the open revolution in a nutshell is. It's that all digital information is open. I mean, all of it, except for personal data. One day, I believe we'll have a world where all software, algorithms, content data is open, free for anyone to use, build on, and share. And public funding continues as it is, and we replace patents and copyrights with remuneration rights. And I like to say that while everyone goes on about IP, there's something that we know must be different about this world. I mean, first of all, intellectual property rights expire. I mean, I know there's some people who think that they shouldn't, particularly some rights holders, but they expire after 20 years. Or even now it's almost forever, but life plus 70, right? So we know they're different. And I always like to make this kind of comment. You've heard of that well-known United Socialist Republic of the United States. But do you know that a medical R&D, of information creation in medicine in the United States, 50% is funded by the government? And of basic research, over 90%. Imagine they were doing that for steel. People would be like, whoa, what's going on? You know, imagine 50% of all cars in the United States were paid for directly by the government. You know? Or 50% of all housing. Or like 90% of all like basic, bread. 90% of all bread was funded by the government from your taxes and was free. Right? We'd be like, whoa, this is no, but they do that for information. Like, people get it at some level. But we haven't gone the whole way. And we haven't had a way to replace it. The normal story is, yes, government funding is great, but it's bureaucrats, it's state. With remuneration rights, we can have the best of both worlds. We can have free enterprise, free markets, free choice, and we can have full access. We can have abundance. So, the thing is, to do that, we need to build a movement. In two ways. I like to say here, if I went back in 1975 and said, my car is green, what would I mean? I'd mean my car was painted green. Now just notice something. If I say today, my car is green, what do you think? It's electric, or it's environmentally friendly. Now I just want to illustrate what that means about a change in our world. At one point, people thought the environment wasn't an issue. It was kind of there's some crazy nut jobs who get excited about, like the whales or something. And now it's mainstream, and there was just a shift in thinking. If I walked down the street in Brighton after this event and said, hey, I want an open world, people would be like, what? Like, they wouldn't even know what open meant, just as if I went around 1975 and said, I want a green world. They're like, what? You want to paint the world green? What do you want to do? So we need to build a movement to change that mentality, and on the other side, we need a movement to put in place remuneration rights. And you can start with one area. Where in your area you can say, hey, could we do a pilot? That's how we get going. We're going to do one experiment that demonstrates this model works, and then we can grow it. Maybe it's for journals, maybe it's for medicines, maybe it's for music. But we need a movement, and we need you. So that's what the book is about. I say again, if you're interested, you can come talk to me about the book. You can come buy a copy. I do want to emphasize, actually, that also the book, I will say the book is open. In keeping with the philosophy, there is a free digital version, and you can then pay. But as I said, I like to also say on that page, unfortunately, we're in a closed world. And open in a closed world, there aren't remuneration rights. So I'm in a tough position in the open model. That's one of the things today that I also emphasize. Open in a closed world without remuneration rights is kind of a niche thing. It's going to be tough to do. So, please come and join the open revolution and make it happen in your area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rufus, for a very thought-provoking piece there. Any questions from the audience, please? We have microphones. Anne, because you're on my eye line.
Hi, thanks Rufus, that was amazing. Do we have a problem in your transition, in your model of transition, that we have multinational entities, but policy around intellectual property is a national, and basically still a nationally owned thing?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So one of the things also about, there's a section in the book as well that you can read, which kind of talks quite a lot about how we get from here to there. Because it's all very well having great ideas, but how we're going to practically do it from where we are today. So one point about that, as you said, is about kind of international agreements. So one of the crucial things about remuneration rights is, let's say the UK implements, let's say, remuneration rights, well, even for journal, around kind of journal stuff, or maybe an easier example I might just pick for music, just for a moment, I'll stick on the music one. So imagine they do it for music. That doesn't mean that all that music is open everywhere else. Because otherwise you'd be like, well, all this stuff's open, but what about, now it's just freely available somewhere else. No, there's other places you could implement it just here, nationally, and let other countries keep patents and copyright, and even let UK artists would still have copyright in France, because France hasn't changed. So, and that's kind of crucial. I mean, it's like the old problem of reciprocal recognition or copyright. UK has copyright. I don't know if you know, but the United States, at least for about 100 years after the Declaration of Independence, did not recognize English copyrights. There's a wonderful story actually that did. I'm just going to tell the story because it's just so great. It didn't make it into the book. I'm just trying to think. He's basically, I'm just trying to remember his exact name now, so forget it. But basically, there's a wonderful example, which is Dickens, for example. I don't know if you know, went to the United States on a speaking tour in about the 1840s, and was really, really on it, really annoyed that the United States basically just kind of could take his books and print them. And, everyone got really annoyed. And a really, really great story about this is, I'm just trying to remember the guy's name. I'm forgetting his name. I'll find it in a moment. But basically, one of the really famous authors of that period, who we don't really read much today, but was a huge bestseller, actually, his brother became ambassador to the United States, and he and a bunch of UK authors actually spent about £1,000 or more, which in today's money is like £1 million, trying to bribe US congressmen to pass a law in the 1840s that would recognize UK copyrights. Now, they actually were bribing US senators and congressmen about this issue. But anyway, the point of the story was that what we already have is what we've done is a lot of the work already of reciprocal recognition on copyright. So we can piggyback on that. So the model would be we have remuneration rights, we keep copyrights and patents everywhere else until France implements remuneration rights, and then we can have a reciprocal kind of recognition model. So it is possible to implement stuff nationally here. And just to be specific, what you'd even do is a model where people license into the remuneration rights fund. You wouldn't have to actually pass law at the moment to get rid of patents and copyrights. It would be like a collecting society model. It might be a bit involuntary. You might want to say it's kind of not quite compulsory licensing, but there's significant, like collecting societies are kind of voluntary, but everyone subscribes. You could imagine ways that if you were implementing this to say, listen, we're putting as much money in, you're guaranteed as much money, but we really want everyone to sign up, in that way. I could go into more detail, but I could go into probably tedious detail about how you might do that. But I won't do that here. And there's stuff in the book about that, but it's a really great question. Can we do this nationally, even though we're in an international world? Yes, you could. And that's crucial probably to starting.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Yes.
I just wondered, in Thomas Piggy's book, he argues that that people really no longer earn an income from labor, and that really income comes from investment. And I wonder, do you see a confusion between how people understand the right to remuneration for their creative work and maybe the lack thereof? So do you think people are confusing the fact that they don't earn very much in creating their works because they think that there's a problem with copyright, people are stealing their works, when in fact, really no one's earning much because nobody's earning anything from their labor?
Well, so actually, this is interesting. So this is a really great question because it speaks to couple of points. So first of all, there is actually, so in a pure state of nature, where we hadn't invented intellectual property rights and information is freely reproducible, the problem we have, right, is that the cost goes to zero very quickly. Like, I can't charge very much for my book because everyone else can share copies of it really quickly. Now, the risk of that is that I don't create my book in the first place. Or more realistically, it costs me 100 million to come up with my medicine. The moment I've invented the formula, it can be shared around and anyone can produce versions of it, or for software. Now, the funny thing is with IP is that in a world where there's enough supply, let's say in a copyrighted works, when there's enough similarity, you're kind of in that world. I have my copyright in my exact music, but your music is almost exactly the same. Price will go quite quickly towards zero, right? And you could argue that the argument actually would be for news, that's sort of been happening. One of the things that's guarding the newspaper industry is news does do something valuable, but there's just too much competition in the digital world and too much just general supply of stuff for people to charge for it. Now, the danger of that is you'll end up with what all the people who are kind of often who go for IP say rightly is that you won't pay for the stuff in the first place. So I would actually say with you, which is one of the arguments I even have with remuneration rights for people who really like IP, is I say there's actually a real problem, maybe in the creative industries with IP, which is there's too much. You do want to pay, but there's too much substitution going on, then prices go to zero. In remuneration rights, you would be setting the fee. I think in general, I think the question of whether people will be paid for their labor, the second point I just want to make on that, I didn't really go on about the inequality point, but really, really quickly, to get the inequality point, think about your apple farmers in the old world. And that's why I'm going to come to your point about labor in a moment, if you trust me on this one, just quickly. So imagine your apple farmers. Do you grow apples? You grow apples, I grow apples. Great. And everyone, that economy, I like to say, looks like a running race. I know I've got different, but it looks like a running race. A running race, though, where everyone who finishes in under 2 hours is a winner. There's no single winner. There was a race like that in my school. In the apple farmer world, that's like it. If I do an okay growing apples, you're maybe slightly more efficient at growing apples, maybe you're slightly worse. But if we do we make a living. Now imagine for a moment that suddenly, one day, there is an apple farmer named Mr. Gates who has a magical apple tree. And the magical apple tree can produce millions of apples every night at no cost to Mr. Gates. What suddenly happens in the apple economy? There's one. There's Mr. Gates. Everyone else goes out of business because he can now supply apples. His cost is zero. So he will be able to supply any price now. He could supply everyone. So you go from an economy with multiple people. Some people make more money, some less. We work at a car factory. I'm a bit better worker than you are. You're a bit worse. She's a bit better. But in this world, suddenly there's one. And you're making money just from your magical replication machine. Now, of course, the real world's a little more complicated. Maybe we compete at the beginning to have the most efficient magical apple tree or something. That's the investment part. But then there's still that one winner. So you can see why you go from an economy where there's multiple apple farmers to just one. That's the driver of the inequality. Now, the thing I like to finally say is think of lawyers, doctors, and engineers. They make money. They make good livings. But they basically make it on a pool of open information, applying that knowledge as a doctor. Not a lot of it's secret, but you have to apply it. So I think what the future economy looks like is you've got this part with remuneration rights for paying for capital-intensive stuff to come up with new stuff, and with the government publicly funded R&D like we have today. And then you have a huge pool of kind of professionals who are applying knowledge. Just like doctors or lawyers get paid for applying open knowledge. You can read the law anytime you want, but it's still a skill to apply it. So I think the future information economy has that mixture of professionals and people working, creating like actual bodies of information who are paid by remuneration rights or or publicly funded information. I think that may be it. We're at
Yeah,
lunch,
it
right?
is.
Very good.
Thank you very much again.